struggle coming between being on the front line, which is a very different reality than what we see here at Hollyhock. And so my time coming to Hollyhock has been a nice reprieve. But I think there's also a lot of ways in which we can support here in the community of Hollyhock. How do we support frontline land defenders and frontline folks that are experiencing the brunt of environmental degradation, but also the brunt of toxic trauma that they experience on their bodies, and bring them into places like this that can be places of healing?
I need to interrupt.
Okay, so it's not going on?
There was an internet glitch. There was just an audio outage.
Okay.
So
We're not going right now? We're live? Okay.
Yeah, but they didn't hear your intro.
Oh, they didn't hear our intro. We're starting again, y'all. So we already started, but we're doing it again. Yay. Okay. Tansawakia, Nia Melina Mia Wapin Laboucan-Massimo, Nia Nihiao, Kinaskumta Nawao. It is an honor and privilege to be here on the solstice in unceded Coast Salish territory in the territories of the Klahus and Slaamin peoples. And I am here with my very good friend and fellow compañera indigenous land defender as well, Nikki Sanchez.
Piali Kwali Tanatzik. I'm so excited to be here on the Klahus Slaamin territories. I want to say hi to all of our Coast Salish relations who are also going through some really intense times right now, but that's reflective of such a moment that we're in globally. And I think a lot of the work that you've been doing for over a decade and I've been doing, now it feels like the rest of the world is kind of starting to catch up and get their boots on the street. So what does that feel like for you to finally see the messages that you've been stewarding for so long be amplified?
I think it's like a bittersweet journey, actually. I think for a lot of frontline land defenders, there's a beauty of the uplifting of our voices, but there's also a bitterness of the trauma that we continue to carry in our bodies that is not really spoken about. A lot of times because we live in an individualistic, capitalistic society, there is a productivity and a placed on how we are valued in society. And then when we get tired or we called, quote, burnt out, or we get exhausted from this work that is extremely traumatizing, is taxing, it happens every day. It's my question is, where do we go for spaces and places of healing? And that's why I decided to, bring this conversation into the Hollyhock as we vision and dream. How does Hollyhock become a place of healing justice, as it has been a place of environmental justice, climate justice? But how do we make it a healing place for not only not Indigenous folks, but also for traumatized populations and people of color, Black communities, and Indigenous communities, and all people that come from structurally oppressed communities?
Yeah, so I'm hearing you say a lot about trauma-informed practice and creating spaces that feel safe. I know that we've been here a few times, both together and separately, in programs in a way that didn't always feel like it was either you're the singular person in the room who has to speak on behalf of all Indigenous people, or you just need to keep your mouth shut because it's not a safe space to share. And I know a lot of other young folks of color who've come here and had similar experiences. What do you think it takes to actually transform a space like this, that it could radically be one of healing and dialogue and solidarity building?
I think it's about increasing accessibility, but it's also bringing people that, have trauma-informed understandings of what it's like to work with populations that have constantly had the burden of having to talk about traumatic experiences in ways that is re-triggering to the body. Yeah. And there's not a lot of healing for that. So a lot of people have to walk away from beautiful spaces like this, and I'm exhausted by the end of the week. And so how do we call people in to have healing spaces, healing experiences from the outside world? I don't know if that's always the case for Indigenous people and people of color and Black people that come here. So I think that I'm really excited with the new leadership and the way that people are now hoping to include trauma-informed ways of being in this beautiful space.
Yeah, and I think that those spaces too, they need to also be led by those folks, right? You can't bring a bunch of Black, Indigenous, POC folks or non-binary, two-spirit folks into a place where the leadership has no representation of who they are, because it doesn't feel like being heard or being understood in a meaningful or structural way, because healing looks different for different people and needs are different for different people. So yeah, those conversations are so important. And I think the false consciousness in Canada for a really long time has been that like the systemic racism is over there, or the structural violence is over there, and the front line isn't right here. But the front line is right here, right now. And it doesn't matter whose territory you're currently occupying or whether it's your own, there is work to be done. And so places like this that are seemingly far removed from the violence that we see on the streets, from the murders committed by police against Indigenous women and men and trans and two-spirit folks, there is absolutely, your gifts are absolutely needed in this time. Your resources are absolutely needed in this time. And then we look out at this incredibly beautiful space on Clahusalam territory with an amazing beach in front of it, and think about like all of those right now who are standing on the streets, being violated by police, being harmed by tear gas, not getting enough sleep every night because they're literally trying to create systemic change for the good of all of us. And so I have been thinking so much about how do we create the structures of care for when this frontline moment ends, and who's going to care for those people when they're healing.
Yeah, and it's definitely been my experience too after 15 plus years of working on the front lines and feeling extremely exhausted and reeling from trauma and reeling from having the emotional labor of having to explain where I'm from, what it's like to be a family member of a murdered missing Indigenous woman, what it's like to, behind closed doors, what life looks like when you're campaigning full time, but then you're also dealing with the police, dealing with the media, dealing with a private investigator, dealing with just a lot of things that people don't see from family members. It's like, I feel like in an individual society, we're not talking about these types of things, like of how to support community members on the front lines. It's just not a conversation, I think, that is being had of what actually healing justice looks like.
And that's a term I really want to acknowledge. Like, the term healing justice has come out of Black feminist movements, and they've been talking about this for decades. And it's like the rest of the word like just got the memo. But healing justice needs to be a fundamental part of revolutionary action. And I think that about this so much after the occupation that we did at the Parliament in solidarity with the Wet'suwet'en, is like, if we're going to put our bodies in the face of violence to protect the land, we also need to return to the land to heal our bodies. So that we can come forward. And I think about the movements that we've sustained and the times where I've been able to do things way beyond my capacity. And I think of the things that have made the difference. And it's like love and community. Like, our sisterhood gives me strength and courage. It emboldens me. Like, no one's going to arrest you beside me and not take me too, you know? Like, if anything's happening to you, it's happening to me as well. And we need to have that kind of solidarity with all of our community and with our land that sustains us. And the other thing too is just like, you're doing all of this, or you're running all of this, and you're getting, launching your solar company, the first Indigenous-owned solar company, and finishing a PhD, and then you're also engaging with daily forms of racism, just like at the gas station when they refuse to take your status card because it's expired, or at the hospital because they assume that I'm an addict, just things like that. How have you personally found ways to cope through that kind of mitigating the really macro to the micro realities of living in systemic racism?
Well, I think this is the challenging thing that we face in this society, because we're in an individualistic society once again, and the social fabric of our Indigenous communities have been torn apart. So me, as when I became bedridden, being really sick after years of work, I realized, like, oh my gosh, the social fabric of my own community has been torn apart. So therefore, when I go into community and I'm like trying to do healing, the medicine people that we would originally know from birth till death are no longer there. That social fabric has been ripped apart, and I think it's a very big struggle. And I feel like when people are tired or burnt out, they're like, go away and you do your healing, and then you can come back to the movement, as if that's not a part of the movement. And I think for me, that's been the most disappointing thing, of seeing people's kind of shunning of people in their healing. And for me, that's why as Hollyhock, I know that was a part of the initial idea for some folks to come here after they were on the front lines to do the healing. And I feel like Hollyhock has that chance again with Black, Brown, and Indigenous peoples to bring them into the fold and to allow people to come into these spaces of healing, to not allow the continued extractivism that of our knowledge, of our perspectives, and not have regenerative and reciprocal ways of exchange, because for me that's just perpetuating capitalism
It is.
if we're not allowing communities to continue to heal.
Yeah, so we have 30 seconds left. As a lifetime activist and someone who's also committed themselves to so much of their own personal healing, what is the question that you'd put forward, or the offering that you'd put forward to emerging activists and to folks who've done a lot of work and had a lot of lifetimes of learning and resources to share? What would you put out there?
So the question that I wrote before I came here today is, if Hollyhock wants to continue to be a place of climate, environmental and social justice discussions and dialogue, then it also must be a place that includes healing justice. So, hi, thank you for listening.